someone had shouted, "Grenade in the well," it would have had the same effect as what you saw now. Everyone was startled and began talking over each other, resulting in a chaotic babble of words. David remained calm, and Frank ordered the rest to settle down. "Frank, let him continue. What else do you know, and what can we expect?" David continued his account. "The attack is planned for an as-yet undetermined time. It involves a very high-ranking person. Omar and Peter Schultz were doing business together. Peter hired himself out for anything and was a lone wolf, or better said, a loose cannon within the AIVD. He was a rogue operative. He would take from all sides as long as it benefited him. He had already infiltrated and destroyed a group of so-called patriots for the AIVD and even received a medal for it." "Frank, why do you know so much?" "David, because I work for another group, namely the Next Genesis Foundation, led by Falk Farmietto. He has been researching the practices of the Illuminati for 5 years. He is aware of the Bilderbergers' plans, the increasingly threatening stance of our government, and the possibility of a shadow cabinet behind the current one. Farmietto has been following politics for years. He is self-taught in many areas, but his broad interests and thirst for freedom made him realize that things were changing in this country, and not for the better. The amount of lies exposed on the internet regarding world politics gave him a different view of the world, a view that did not align with his Dutch sense of norms and values. According to him, this responsibility lies with the parents, not the government. When the government takes over the teaching and educational role and sets state norms as the example, we are quickly on the path to forming a new Hitler Youth, new cannon fodder. This fearful outlook became clear to him after the many pieces of information and events he witnessed online. Combining this with radio and television, it soon became evident to him that things were happening that were not entirely above board. Like the Greet Hoffmans affair, you have to read between the lines. Isn't it strange that from a queen of a country, someone blessed with common sense, you would expect that she would never dabble in astrology and faith healing? A leader of a country who allows herself to be foretold. The strange thing is that what happens in the higher elite circles tends more toward the occult than the rational. Secret sessions held at a secondary castle. Was Juliana such a foolish woman, or did she truly believe in the faith healer? When you ask people what they think of horoscopes and astrology, most see it as some kind of hocus pocus. But what if it turns out that Grietje saw and knew more than she was comfortable with? What if she had foreseen that the devilish plan regarding the establishment of the Fourth Reich would begin with the formation of the Bilderberg Group, and that Juliana could no longer escape from the clutches of the monster named Bernhard? Was her fate already sealed? Did she know what Bernhard and his Bilderberg Group were planning? Farmietto knew this plan existed because it is a plan that comes directly from the Bible. With a Catholic background, and after his visit to Patmos, where he visited the cave where the Armageddon, better known as the Last Judgment, was written, Farmietto knew the story. The coming of the Antichrist, the rapture, the battle of Armageddon, the resurrection of Jesus, the Son of God, all things that are still ahead of us, and all before 2012.
Besides these scenarios, there are many possibilities, one of which involves the revelation of extraterrestrial life, establishing a world power through oppression, while they themselves, perhaps, and according to David Icke, are the real aliens. Think of the 13 bloodlines. A second possibility is that the stories from Mesopotamia are true, and the Anunnaki, those who come from the heavens, are now on their way with their planet Nibiru. This causes all kinds of natural disasters and ultimately a polar shift and backward rotation. There are countless possibilities. The question now is not so much how, but when. David took his glass of cola and continued his story. Farmietto was the acquaintance who asked me to come to Tilburg and ensured that I didn't meet the same fate as my brothers. But what about that second attack? Well, at first it wasn't clear, but as I began to understand the situation better, I got a clearer picture of the relationships between Peter, Grossfeld, and Omar. Farmietto had investigated Grossfeld and discovered that he had served as a sniper in Lebanon and Bosnia. This allowed him to connect Suzanne and Grossfeld. After his search in the archives, he discovered that Susan's brother, like Nico Grossfeld, had been a first-class sniper and stationed in the same unit as her brother. This Jan van Inschot died in a tragic accident in Bosnia. He was killed by what the Americans call friendly fire. A stray bullet, a misjudgment of the situation, faulty equipment. The investigation afterward concluded that it was an unfortunate accident. The combat instructions were followed to the letter, but it was said that such incidents were not uncommon. It was, after all, a war situation. According to experts, the sacrifices these boys made were unavoidable in the necessity of the mission, namely the reconstruction of Bosnia. After her brother's death, Suzanne developed a deep hatred for everything related to the military. Her resentment toward the royal family grew, especially after Maxima's statement that we Dutch have no distinct identity. Suzanne began to question what we could teach the Afghans about self-development if we ourselves didn't know our own identity. A good example is supposed to inspire. What if we didn't know our own identity? What could we teach the Afghans in their search for identity? Grossfeld had been a witness to the accident and later played an important role in the investigation. The relationship between Peter and Suzanne was known. Susan knew Peter from her visits to hives and through Frank. She didn't know then that he was the one who had exposed the group of patriots who were recruited through the site and for which she was also approached. Grossfeld was playing a double game. Besides working for the AIVD, he also worked for Omar Abdul bin Laden. There was an attack planned on our queen involving 2 shooters. The second shooter was Grossfeld, who wasn't blackmailed but, like Peter, wasn't averse to money, a lot of money. He and Omar worked out the plan together. Tom listened to the whole story and thought it was the best story he had ever heard. Come on, guys. We're talking about the Netherlands and our queen. I'm willing to believe in conspiracies, but this tops everything. This is even better than the tall tale contest you set up 2 years ago for whoever could come up with the best story. And now you're saying this is real. Just give the creator of this story the cup right now. It can't get any stronger than this. He looked at Frank, who looked back at him and burst into laughter. Willink, increasingly amused but wanting to know more, asked David with a face that looked 20 years older, "Why the Queen?" David, "She is the one who chairs the Bilderberg meetings and has a significant role in establishing a new world order."
The majority of the Muslim world believed that by doing this they would force the Illuminati to take a significant step back. After 2,000 years, they also wanted to rid themselves of Western interference, and that was the problem. The richest bankers are Rothschild and Rockefeller, and they are Jews. They needed to find another way, so they sought a solution by exposing the Illuminati's plan. After the attack, they planned to broadcast a documentary via Al Jazeera that would reveal the practices of this queen. Her father's role and that of her family would be depicted through old, never-before-seen footage and secret audio recordings, showing them as the ruthless Nazis they were and are. This documentary was also to be sent to CNN. The attack on Wilders was the beginning of the Dutch part of the plan, with one of the highlights being the attack in Apeldoorn, carried out by the AIVD in collaboration with the CIA, our own 9/11. Frank saw that the lawyer was beginning to get annoyed. He understood this. He saw that the lawyer was struggling with the fact that the situation was becoming hopeless. Frank took the lawyer aside and told him that it was important for him, as a man of the law, not to be overwhelmed by despair, but to remain alert and sharp to maintain the calm that was now desperately needed. "How's the sound?" Peter's gruff voice came through the headphones of the man operating the equipment in the black van next to the St. Jacob's Church. "The reception is excellent," he heard Peter say. Suddenly, the van door swung open, and the startled agents looked into the barrel of an M16 with a silencer attached. The man in the balaclava silenced them by putting his finger to his mouth. Meanwhile, Frank was informed by Robert, "The Hornet has been removed." This was enough for Frank to know they were no longer being listened to, and that measures had been taken to prevent this. Frank, "But what I still don't understand is why you work for Far Meadow and your brothers ended up there through Peter." David, "The explanation is simple. I was recruited by Peter along with my brothers, but I then got a call from Far Meadow, who apparently knew we had been recruited. What about Omar and Susan? David: that whole internet date was a farce. Omar works for the Saudi government and has created a countergroup to the Bilderberg Group. These are the freedom fighters of Islam, fighting for their truth, which according to them is the Quran. They closely watched the developments in the West, especially the American government, which is being eaten from the inside by parasites. They occupy almost all high positions within the American government and have begun the attack from within. Omar and his people know the Illuminati's plan. These parasitic insiders are all officially citizens of Omar's arch-enemy Israel, and besides an American passport, also have an Israeli passport.
A plan dating back to 1776, where they aimed to dominate the entire world by owning and acquiring all economic resources globally, and thereby all the power that money can buy. This idea, conceived by the Jew Rothschild, was supposed to reach its peak in 2012, a biblical climax. On December 21st, 2012, our sun will be exactly in the center of the Milky Way. This is an important moment for humanity. Various theories circulate about this. According to the Mayans, it's the end of the world, the end of their calendar. According to fascists, it's the birth of the Fourth Reich, the sun symbolizing the phoenix rising from its ashes. According to many beliefs, it's Armageddon, accompanied by the return of Jesus, the Son of God. Whatever it is, it promises little good for most of humanity. A week before his death, Susan received a diary from her brother in which he described that the plan to assassinate the Queen and his role in it had been ready since the fiasco in Bosnia, where Dutch troops were involuntarily involved in a premeditated genocide in the special Muslim enclave of Srebrenica. Being a deliberate witness to the deportation and murder of all Muslim men in that enclave had shown the Dutch military leadership who was pulling the strings behind the scenes. Without the promised air support from the Americans, they had to watch as Mladic and his men completed the genocide. Jan, Suzanne's brother, had shed the traumatic experience and faced an even bigger problem. He was 18 when he voluntarily enlisted, a young, innocent boy who thought that by joining the military, he would become a real man. His doubts about his sexuality were soon no longer doubts. Homosexuals can be found everywhere, even in the military. He wrote in his diary that he was in love with his superior, Lieutenant Jager, a handsome 50-year-old who gave him a fatherly feeling and was the epitome of calm in many situations. After a company party, the spark ignited, and they spent the night in a pup tent outside the compound. Both knew it was an impossible love. The lieutenant was married. Nevertheless, the secret relationship continued, and the lieutenant introduced him to a group of officers who all had the same sexual preference. He attended various parties and soon came into contact with other men. The ranks were increasingly higher, and the parties took on an increasingly occult character.
During these parties, various films were shown, including a whole series of films from the secret prisons, featuring treatment methods of prisoners in secret underground prisons that had begun to be built in the new Bosnia. Then suddenly, the blackmail letters began. Someone knew about it and wanted something from him in exchange for silence. If people in the Netherlands got wind of this, many high-ranking military leaders and even politicians would have a hard time explaining it. He said that he knew Groesveld, the other sniper in his platoon, and had met him at one such party. He knew that Groesveld was also being pressured. He had spoken with him about the plans. Jan envisioned the images of King's days passing by, the orange feeling, Maxima, and immediately realized that he couldn't imagine the Netherlands without all of this. The eternal loyalty of the Dutch soldier to his royal house weighed heavily on his mind. Jan wrote in his diary about his fears and, after much deliberation, decided not to go through with it. A week later, the family received the news of Jan's death. Omar and Groesveld knew about the diary because the mates from his unit, during the investigation into Jan's death, had talked about a green booklet in which he wrote every day. In his possessions, they found nothing but a receipt for a sent package. This was addressed to Susan. Susan had let the matter rest and did not want to wake sleeping dogs, wanting to preserve her brother's good reputation. This explained her feelings towards the royal house. She had the idea that if she were queen, she would never put the lives of young subjects like her brother on the line. She put the diary in a safe at her bank and ensured that no one would ever see it. To get hold of that diary, Omar arranged the internet date. Frank, some things are becoming clearer now. At least we have a reason for Susan's murder. She knew about the second attack and thus had to be eliminated. Tom told me she was followed after her visit to Stephen Omar in Tilburg. It was probably not intended for her to encounter Grossfeld there, who likely wasn't sure if she had recognized him. Peter and Grossfeld were both at the crime scene. Grossfeld had a motive. But what about Peter? Peter Schultz was the new shooter. That is surprising. Who does he work for? We know he works for the AIVD, but what is the connection with Omar? Peter is a member of the Bilderberg group. He is even a nephew of an important and esteemed member within this club. The elite has always been fascinated by fascist ideas. A smaller, easily controlled population, run with the efficiency of a death camp. His uncle experimented in the camps with genetic manipulation and birth control. By adding fluoride to the water, they made prisoners infertile and refined many such experiments to improve the killing machine. The speed and efficiency with which this system works are constantly being improved, and current technological means make the work increasingly simpler. Faster computer systems will soon be able to process or remove larger numbers of people from the system. But conducting politics is the constant planning to destroy your opponent by all available means. Counterintelligence is part of that, but double-crossing is also allowed and often even indispensable. Peter Schultz, for that is his real name, is no exception to this rule. He had already handled many jobs and has an excellent track record. He is reportedly on very good terms with our Queen and is regularly spotted at Soestik. After Klaus's death, his visits became even more frequent. Due to his busy work schedule, also at your broadcasting company, he was often seen in the evenings. He is a ruthless figure. He is their agent in the field. Our Queen is also a member of the Bilderbergers, right? Yes, that's correct, but there are also traitors within this group. By eliminating our royal house and establishing a republic within Europe, nationalist thoughts will quickly come to an end, and Paris will become the capital. The ensuing panic in the involved countries will ensure that the EU tightens the rules and, under a form of martial law, silences the population. This group is the real Illuminati, the successors of Rothschild, the true Jews. Their plan is total dominion and the establishment of a totalitarian government without religions, with only one god, money. My idea is that he collaborates with them. Omar, the opposing party, knows Peter from previous missions they were involved in, such as 9/11 and the bombings in Madrid and London.
After watching the films Loose Change and The Endgame, one can now assume that these attacks were carried out by their own governments. The absence of intercepting aircraft, the disappearance of the black boxes, the enormous heat of melted steel, even days later, at the bottom of the WTC basements, the many explosions heard by witnesses, including firefighters with years of experience in dealing with fires. 2 skyscrapers collapsing due to fire has never happened in history. The third tower, building number 7, also collapsed due to fire, but was never hit by a plane. The same building housed a specially designated headquarters for the mayor during a disaster. The many pieces of evidence piled up, and the public demanded transparency and is still trying to uncover the truth. Something that, with the US on the brink of a depression, is increasingly being pushed into the background. The crisis is the new enemy. This is all heavy stuff. I suggest that what has been heard here stays here. I'll go over the matters with Everett once more, and we'll take action based on the current situation. You all understand that we can't trust anyone outside this group. Go home, and I'll let you know as soon as possible what we're going to do. The men agreed to light up a joint and let everything sink in. As if it were planned, the song The End by The Doors played through the speakers, and everyone got lost in their own thoughts. Frank was the first to leave after thanking Robert for his help and making a new appointment with Everett. Life, after all, went on as usual. The surveillance van was found the next day in the parking lot opposite the bowling alley. Both agents were handcuffed in the back, and the equipment in the van was completely destroyed. The discs with the recorded conversations were gone. Peter was pacing around the van. Shit, they're smarter than I thought. 1-0 for you, Verhofstadt. But the game isn't over yet.